Before you relax, let me warn you, this story isn't about someone else. By the end, you may realize it's been controlling you all along. Imagine waking up every morning and feeling the weight of everyone else's pain before you've even opened your eyes. Your partner's stress. Your co-worker's resentment. The stranger on the subway whose sadness leaked into your nervous system through nothing more than a glance. You don't just notice these emotions, you absorb them. They become indistinguishable from your own. Now imagine you can't turn it off. Your chest tightens when someone raises their voice 3 rooms away. A minor criticism from a friend echoes in your mind for weeks, morphing into proof that you're fundamentally broken. You watch a sad movie and feel grief so overwhelming you can't function for hours. You walk into a crowded room and immediately sense every tension, every unspoken conflict, every masked disappointment, and your body responds as if all of it is happening to you. This isn't drama. This isn't weakness. This is the hidden reality of people who feel everything too deeply, and if you're one of them, you already know the terror of living without emotional skin. But here's what's truly disturbing. While you've been told your entire life that you're too sensitive, too emotional, too much, science is revealing something far more complex. Your brain might actually be wired differently. Your nervous system might be processing emotional information in ways that most people simply don't. You're not broken. You're not defective. You're operating with an entirely different neurological architecture, and no one gave you the manual. So here's the question that should terrify you. What happens when you're built to feel everything in a world that demands you feel nothing? What happens when your greatest gift, your capacity for depth, becomes your most dangerous liability? And what happens when you've spent so long trying to fix yourself that you've forgotten you were never the problem to begin with? Before we dive deeper into this psychological labyrinth, drop a comment right now. Are you someone who feels too much, or do you know someone who does? Type too deep if this already feels uncomfortably personal. Because what we're about to explore might completely reframe how you see yourself, and it might explain why life has always felt like you're playing on a difficulty setting no one else can see. Let's descend into the hidden psychology of hypersensitivity. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth. If you feel everything too deeply, your brain is literally different. This isn't metaphor. This isn't poetry. Neuroscience research over the past 2 decades has identified a personality trait called sensory processing sensitivity, and approximately 15 to 20% of the population possesses it. If you're in this group, your brain's emotional processing centers, particularly the insula, amygdala, and mirror neuron regions, show heightened activation when exposed to emotional stimuli. Translation. Your brain doesn't just register emotions. It amplifies them. Think of it this way. Most people experience emotions through a standard radio receiver. They pick up the signal, process it, and move on. But if you're hypersensitive, your brain is a high-definition satellite dish with the volume permanently stuck at maximum. Every emotional frequency, yours, there's the ambient emotional atmosphere of a room, gets picked up, amplified, and integrated into your nervous system with crushing intensity. Dr. Elaine Aron, the psychologist who pioneered research into sensory processing sensitivity, discovered something crucial. This trait is evolutionary. It appears across over 100 species. Why? Because in tribal environments, having members who could detect subtle emotional shifts, sense danger before it became obvious, and deeply process complex social dynamics provided a survival advantage to the group. You weren't designed to be normal. You were designed to be a sentinel, someone who feels the tremors before the earthquake. But here's where it gets dark. That same neural architecture that made you valuable in a small, interconnected tribe becomes a nightmare in modern society. You're processing emotional data at a rate and depth that your environment was never designed to accommodate. Every notification, every headline, every overheard conversation in a coffee shop, every piece of background music in a grocery store, every facial micro-expression from a stranger passing on the street. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between relevant and irrelevant emotional data. It processes everything. Now layer on the default mode network, the brain's introspective processing system. Research shows that hypersensitive individuals have heightened activity in this network, meaning you don't just feel deeply in the moment, you ruminate deeply afterward. That offhand comment from 3 weeks ago? Your brain has replayed it 10,000 times, analyzing every possible meaning, every potential implication, constructing elaborate narratives about what it reveals about your worth. This is where the psychological torture begins. Because while your brain is doing all this processing, it's also flooding your system with stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. Your body can't tell the difference between processing someone else's emotional state and experiencing a genuine threat to your survival. So it activates the same fight or flight response it would if a predator were chasing you. Except the predator is a casual conversation at a party where someone seemed slightly less enthusiastic than usual when talking to you. Let me illustrate this with a scenario. You're at work. Your manager walks past your desk without making eye contact. For a neurotypical person, this registers as a neutral event. Maybe they were distracted, maybe they were thinking about a meeting. But for you, your brain immediately begins threat assessment. Did I do something wrong? Are they angry? Am I about to be fired? Your amygdala triggers. Your heart rate increases. Your focus fractures. By the time you get home, you've constructed 17 different narratives about why your manager didn't make eye contact, each one more catastrophic than the last. You can't sleep because your nervous system is still in threat mode. The next day, you're exhausted before you even arrive at work, and when your manager does speak to you normally, you feel a flood of relief so intense it's almost painful. This is the exhausting cycle: hypervigilance, rumination, physiological stress response, relief, repeat. And the cruelest part: most people will never understand what you just went through. To them, someone walking past a desk without making eye contact is background noise. To you, it was a 6-hour emotional ordeal. This is what it means to have a brain wired for depth in a world optimized for shallowness. But here's the question that should disturb you even more. If your brain is constantly absorbing and amplifying emotional information from others, where does your emotional experience end and theirs begin? How much of what you feel actually belongs to you? This leads us to something even more sinister, a neurological phenomenon that traps hypersensitive people in a prison they can't see. Now we enter the labyrinth, the mirror neuron system. You've probably heard of mirror neurons, the brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. They're the reason you flinch when you watch someone get hurt in a movie. They're the neurological basis of empathy. But in hypersensitive individuals, the mirror neuron system doesn't just allow you to understand others' emotions, it forces you to become them. Research using fMRI scans shows that when highly sensitive people observe someone experiencing pain or distress, their brain activation patterns are nearly identical to actually experiencing that pain themselves. Your brain doesn't distinguish between witnessed suffering and personal suffering. The neural signature is the same. Think about what this means for your daily life. You watch your friend describe their breakup. A neurotypical person feels sympathy, a cognitive acknowledgement of someone else's pain. But your nervous system floods with the actual experience of heartbreak. The tightness in your chest. The difficulty breathing. The crushing sense of loss. You're not imagining their pain. You're not being dramatic. Your brain is literally generating the felt experience of their trauma inside your own body. This is the mirror neuron prison. You can't witness suffering without suffering yourself. Now imagine you're in a relationship. Your partner comes home stressed from work. They're venting about their horrible boss, their impossible deadlines, their exhaustion. What happens to you? Most people can listen, offer support, and maintain their own emotional equilibrium. But you absorb their stress. Their anxiety becomes your anxiety. Their cortisol becomes your cortisol. Within minutes, you're more overwhelmed by their work stress than they are, and now you have to manage both their emotional state and your own amplified version of it. But here's where it becomes truly insidious. You can't tell them. Because if you say, "Your stress is overwhelming me," you become the problem. You become the high-maintenance partner. The one who makes everything about them. So you suppress your own overwhelming emotional response to protect them from the burden of your sensitivity. You sacrifice your nervous system to maintain the relationship. This dynamic repeats across every connection in your life. Your parents' disappointment, your siblings' resentment, your co-workers' passive aggression, your friends' jealousy. You don't just observe these emotional states, you embody them. And because you can feel what they're not saying, you often understand their emotional truth better than they do. This makes you an exceptional friend, partner, and confidant. But it also makes you an emotional dumping ground, because people are drawn to you. They sense, often unconsciously, that you get them in ways others don't. So they share more. They open up. They unload. And every time they do, you're absorbing their emotional weight without realizing you have nowhere to put it down. Carl Jung called this psychic infection, the unconscious transfer of emotional and psychological content from one person to another. For most people, this happens occasionally and mildly. For you, it happens constantly and intensely. Now layer on another devastating element, emotional contagion. Studies show that hypersensitive people are particularly vulnerable to absorbing the prevailing emotional atmosphere of any environment. Walk into a room where two people just had an argument, and even if no one says anything, your nervous system registers the residual tension. You feel the anger that's still hanging in the air. Your body responds as if you're in conflict, even though you weren't even present for the original interaction. This is why crowded places are torture. It's not about introversion or social anxiety. It's about your brain simultaneously processing and partially embodying the emotional states of dozens or hundreds of people at once. You're not being antisocial when you need to leave the party early. You're experiencing neurological overload from absorbing more emotional data than your system can process. But here's the most disturbing implication of the mirror neuron prison. If you're constantly absorbing and embodying others' emotional states, what happens to your own emotional identity? Over time, you lose the ability to distinguish between what you genuinely feel and what you've absorbed from others. That anxiety you're experiencing, is it yours, or did you pick it up from your anxious friend yesterday? That sadness, is it about your life, or are you carrying someone else's grief? You become a psychological composite, a collection of other people's emotional experiences with no clear sense of your own emotional core. This is the ultimate trap. Your greatest gift, your profound empathy, your capacity to truly understand others, gradually erases your sense of self. Sartre called this the gaze, the way others' perceptions of you gradually replace your own self-understanding. But for hypersensitive people, it's not just perceptions. It's the actual felt experience of being other people while simultaneously losing track of who you are. So you ask yourself, what do I actually want? And the answer is terrifyingly unclear, because you've spent so much energy managing and absorbing everyone else's emotional reality that you've neglected to construct your own. This is the paradox we need to examine next. How the very depth that connects you to others becomes the source of your most profound isolation. Here's the cruel irony. The deeper you feel, the lonelier you become. You would think that people who experience emotions with extraordinary intensity would form the deepest, most intimate connections. And in some ways, you do. Your friendships have a quality of emotional honesty that others rarely achieve. Your romantic relationships, when they work, touch levels of intimacy that most people never experience. But there's a shadow side that's rarely discussed. Because while you're capable of profound connection, you're also experiencing a form of loneliness that's almost impossible to articulate to people who don't share your wiring. Let's examine why. First, there's the intensity mismatch. When you care about someone, you care with your entire nervous system. You remember details about their lives that they've forgotten. You notice subtle shifts in their emotional state that they're not even aware of. You invest emotional energy at a depth that feels natural to you, but overwhelming to them. So what happens? You text your friend to check in about something they mentioned in passing 3 weeks ago. To you, this is normal. You've been thinking about them, wondering how that situation resolved. But to them, it's intense. It's a lot. They experience your care as pressure. You're not being clingy. You're operating at your natural emotional frequency. But to people wired for standard emotional processing, your frequency feels like too much, too fast, too deep. This creates an agonizing dynamic. You're always moderating your emotional expression to avoid overwhelming others. You're always calibrating how much you can care without scaring people away. You're always hiding the true depth of what you feel to make others comfortable. You're performing emotional moderation, and it's exhausting. Now add the second element, the recognition gap. When you share your emotional experience with neurotypical people, they literally can't conceptualize what you're describing. You try to explain that a minor criticism from your boss has been creating genuine physical pain for 3 days. They respond with, "Just don't think about it." You try to explain that being in a crowded mall feels like your nervous system is being attacked. They say, "Everyone gets a little overwhelmed sometimes." You try to explain that you're carrying the emotional weight of 6 different people's problems and you don't know how to put them down. They say, "You just need better boundaries." But boundaries don't change neural architecture. Boundaries don't alter mirror neuron activation. Boundaries don't reduce sensory processing sensitivity. This is the recognition gap. No matter how articulate you are, people who don't experience hypersensitivity can't truly understand what you're describing. And their inability to understand registers to you as invalidation, which, given your sensitivity to rejection, creates yet another layer of pain. So you stop sharing. You stop trying to explain. You smile and say, "I'm fine," because the effort of translating your internal experience into terms that others can comprehend is more exhausting than just carrying it alone. This leads to the third element, the depth-shallowness barrier. You crave conversations about meaning, about emotional truth, about the subtle textures of human experience. Small talk feels like psychological violence, not because you're pretentious, but because your brain is wired to seek depth, and surface-level interaction creates genuine cognitive dissonance. But here's the problem. Most social interaction is designed to be shallow. Casual conversations, professional networking, social media exchanges. These environments reward brevity, lightness, and emotional distance. You're built for depth in a culture that rewards shallowness. So you find yourself in this excruciating position, surrounded by people but profoundly alone. You're at the party, engaging in conversation, but every exchange feels like you're speaking a language no one else understands. You're using the same words, but the emotional subtext you're communicating is invisible to everyone around you. Kierkegaard described this as the sickness unto death, the despair of being a self that can't be recognized by others. For hypersensitive people, this isn't abstract philosophy. It's daily experience. And then there's the ultimate paradox. Intimacy creates vulnerability, which amplifies your sensitivity, which makes intimacy terrifying. When you let someone in, you don't just share your emotions, you share your entire nervous system. You become exquisitely vulnerable to their emotional states, their judgments, their potential rejection. Your mirror neurons don't distinguish between physical proximity and emotional proximity. The closer someone gets, the more deeply you absorb them. This means falling in love is existentially dangerous. Because if they leave, you don't just lose them, you lose the version of yourself that was constructed through absorbing them. You don't just grieve the relationship, you grieve the loss of your own emotional equilibrium, which was fundamentally reorganized around their presence. So you face an impossible choice: risk the depth of connection your soul craves, knowing it might destroy you, or protect yourself through distance, knowing you'll suffocate from loneliness. This is the connection-isolation paradox. Your capacity for depth both enables and destroys intimacy. And when intimacy fails, when the rejection inevitably comes, the consequences are far more severe for you than for others. Which brings us to perhaps the darkest element of hypersensitivity. If you feel everything too deeply, rejection doesn't just hurt, it threatens your fundamental sense of reality. Neuroscience research reveals something disturbing. The brain processes social rejection using the same neural pathways as physical pain. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and anterior insula, regions that activate when you burn your hand or stub your toe, light up identically when you experience social exclusion. Your brain literally can't distinguish between physical injury and social rejection. But for hypersensitive individuals, this effect is magnified. Studies using fMRI scans show that people with high sensory processing sensitivity display significantly greater activation in these pain processing regions when exposed to social rejection scenarios, even hypothetical ones. Translation: rejection doesn't just hurt more for you. It registers as a more severe threat to your survival. Let me walk you through what this actually feels like. Someone you care about doesn't respond to your text for 6 hours. For a neurotypical person, this might register as mild disappointment or not register at all. For you, your brain begins threat assessment. Did I say something wrong? Are they pulling away? Do they not value me anymore? But it's not just cognitive anxiety, it's somatic. Your chest tightens. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your stomach churns. Your body is responding to this unreturned text with the same physiological stress response it would use for genuine danger. By the time they respond with, "Sorry, busy day," a completely normal explanation, you've already experienced hours of actual physiological suffering. And the neurotypical person who caused this suffering has no idea it even happened. Now scale this up to actual rejection. An ended friendship. A romantic breakup. Being excluded from a social event. Being criticized in front of others. For most people, these experiences are painful but manageable. Sadness. Disappointment. Temporary blow to self-esteem. Then, gradual recovery. But for you, your mirror neurons are firing, creating the felt experience of not just your pain but your mental simulation of their feelings about you. Your rumination systems are activating, replaying every possible moment where you failed, where you were too much, where you proved you were unlovable. Your nervous system is flooding with stress hormones at levels typically reserved for genuine trauma. This is why a breakup can disable you for months while your ex seems fine after weeks. It's not that you're weaker. It's that your brain is processing the rejection as a fundamentally more severe threat. Dr. Naomi Eisenberger's research at UCLA demonstrated that the same brain regions involved in physical pain regulation, like the opioid receptor system, are also involved in moderating social pain. This suggests that social rejection creates a form of suffering that's neurologically equivalent to physical injury. For you, rejection is literally traumatic. But here's where society makes this exponentially worse. The world punishes your sensitivity. You're told you're too emotional, too needy, too dramatic, too intense. Every message you receive from childhood onward communicates the same thing. Your emotional experience is inappropriate. Your depth is a flaw. Your sensitivity is a weakness that needs to be fixed. So what do? You internalize this message. You develop shame around your own emotional experience. You begin to see your sensitivity, your fundamental neurological architecture, as evidence that you're broken. This creates a devastating secondary wound. Not only do you experience rejection more intensely, but you also believe you deserve rejection because your sensitivity makes you defective. This is what psychologists call compound trauma. The original pain of rejection, plus the shame of feeling that pain too much, plus the internalized belief that your emotional nature makes you unworthy of acceptance. And the cruelest element. The more you try to suppress your sensitivity to gain acceptance, the more disconnected you become from yourself, which makes authentic connection even more impossible, which increases your likelihood of rejection, which confirms your belief that your sensitivity is the problem. You're trapped in a feedback loop where the very trait that would enable deep connection, if properly understood and valued, becomes the reason you can't sustain connection. Gabor Mate's research on attachment and sensitivity reveals that hypersensitive children who grow up in invalidating environments develop complex trauma responses. Not because anything overtly abusive happened, but because the daily experience of having your emotional reality dismissed, minimized, or pathologized is itself a form of psychological injury. Your sensitivity didn't break you. The world's response to your sensitivity broke you. And now you walk through life with a nervous system that's simultaneously hyper-aware of others' emotional states and utterly convinced that your own emotional experience is shameful, which makes vulnerability terrifying, which makes intimacy impossible, which creates the very isolation that causes the most pain to someone wired for deep connection. This is the amplification effect. Rejection hurts more, you shame yourself for how much it hurts, others invalidate your pain, and the cycle deepens. So what happens when you live like this for years? When your nervous system never gets a break from processing emotional intensity? Let me introduce you to Maya. She's 28, works in marketing, objectively successful, and she's drowning. It's 3 a.m. and Maya is lying in bed, replaying a team meeting from 14 hours ago. Her manager made a passing comment, "Let's make sure we're all on the same page going forward." The phrase was directed at the entire team, but Maya's brain has been dissecting it ever since. Going forward, that implies something was wrong before. Was I not on the same page? Did I miss something? Is this about my presentation last week? Sarah gave me a weird look when I was talking. Oh God, do they think I'm incompetent? Her heart is racing. Her mind is constructing elaborate narratives about her imminent firing. She knows, intellectually, that she's probably overreacting. But knowing doesn't stop the cascade. She finally falls asleep at 4:30 a.m. 6 hours later, she drags herself to work, already depleted. Her coworker Jake is having a bad day. He's short with her when she asks about a project deadline. Just a terse, "I'll get to it when I can." No eye contact. Maya's chest tightens immediately. Her mirror neurons are firing. She doesn't just observe Jake's frustration, she feels it. His stress becomes her stress. But layered on top is a new narrative. He's angry at me. I did something wrong. I asked at the wrong time. I'm annoying him. Everyone probably finds me annoying. By lunch, she's carrying Jake's stress, her manager's ambiguous comment from yesterday, and her own mounting anxiety. She sits in the bathroom stall, trying to breathe, wondering why something as simple as existing at work feels like emotional warfare. That evening, she meets her best friend for dinner. Her friend is going through a difficult breakup and needs support. Maya listens, really listens. She feels every ounce of her friend's heartbreak. Her nervous system is generating the actual somatic experience of grief. By the time dinner ends, Maya is more emotionally devastated by her friend's breakup than her friend is. But she can't say this. Because if she does, she's making it about herself. So she goes home carrying her friend's grief, Jake's irritation, her manager's possible disappointment, and her own mounting sense that she's failing at the basic task of being a functional human. She pours a glass of wine. Then, another. It's the only thing that turns down the volume. This is a Tuesday. A completely normal Tuesday. Now multiply this experience across months, years, a lifetime. The exhaustion isn't about one bad day. It's about a nervous system that never rests. It's about processing emotional data at a volume and intensity that your body was never designed to sustain long-term. 3 months later, Maya's manager calls her in for a check-in. Is everything okay? You seem distant lately. Maya wants to laugh. She's distant because she's exhausted from being too close to everyone's